this, I have to give them each 3 burning questions. We're going to start with Kmart. Which wide receiver standoff ends first? Jamar Chase, Brandon Ayuk, or CeeDee Lamb?
Well, RC, I mean, Jerry Jones told us he's having productive talks. So how could I say anybody other than CeeDee Lamb? It sounds like these two sides are close. I think out of these 3, CeeDee Lamb is going to be the only one who gets the kind of money he's looking for and is playing on the team that he's currently with.
CeeDee Lamb is a player who's needed on that team, but Mike T, which quarterback will have the biggest bounce back season for you?
RC, I'm going to go with Joe Burrow. You know, he only played 10 games last year coming off of that big wrist injury, but I think the offensive line's better. Obviously, they need Jamar Chase. They lost Joe Mixon, but I think Zach Moss will more than compensate there. And I love Jermaine Burton, 3rd-round pick out of Alabama. So if he can stay healthy, this team is loaded. And again, that's assuming Jamar Chase is there, but Joe Burrow should be there at the end with the Bengals.
Lewis, which quarterback should win the starting job in Pittsburgh?
Yeah, I think this has to be Justin Fields, Ryan. Look, I mean, both of these guys came into this organization this year with no equity build up with this organization in particular. We say all the time the league is about availability, even more so than your ability. Russ hasn't been available, no fault of his own. Justin has taken advantage of those reps, those increased reps. I think he has shown you enough upside to think that right now he's the guy who needs to be QB1 come week 1.
Well, headed into this game, Lewis, the Steelers released an updated depth chart, and Russell Wilson is listed ahead of Justin Fields
so much
as
for what
QB1 yet again. Hey, they're supposed to get the graphics to match up with your opinion.
Yeah.
Hey, Mark, we want you to sort of set the scene for us, though. What are you hearing about this 3rd and final preseason game in Pittsburgh?
I mean, the great thing about the Steelers is this is, to me, what feels like the one true QB competition, where you're heading into this important game. It's preseason, but we still expect to see a lot of both of these guys. Now, it depends what head coaches you talk to. Some will say, I actually don't put as much stock in the preseason games as I do in those joint practices. But Mike Tomlin has said, I put a lot of stock into what I see on the field. And so far, but with the offense with both of these quarterbacks hasn't looked that crisp. Is that a delicate way of putting it? They've dealt with injuries on the offensive line. Jaylen Warren now missing a couple weeks. His status for week 1 is questionable. So this is a pivotal game for both of these guys. But I don't know. I feel like if you felt like Justin Fields was more athletic, had more upside, I don't think what we've seen in the preseason has changed your mind. If anything, we knew that going in.
Yeah, I think you got to take it all into account now, right? I mean, like I said just a minute ago, none of these guys have any equity with this football team.
Yeah.
So I think everything matters. I think meetings matter. I think walkthroughs matter. I think joint practices matter. I think 7-on-7, 9-on-7, team, red zone, everything matters, whether it's the game or not. And I know Mike T has said this, and look, who am I to question anything that this man says? But he says, look, what happens in game-type situations for him weighs very heavily on his decision-making, and I get that. And I'm a believer in that too. But I think right now, it's about the body of work that these guys have put together in every different scenario that they have been exposed to with this organization. Because right now, if you just went off a game experience, I mean, what they've done in the game, you tell me who's the better guy. I mean, I would still say, look, from an upside perspective, I think Justin gives Arthur more of what he can work with, and I think he's going to get better. I think this offense is tailor-made for him. So in the end, I think they'll land on him, but this will be interesting all the way down the road.
Mike T, from an executive standpoint, when you're looking at both of these men in such different places in their career, who should you want to win the starting job?
Justin Fields, RC, he's 10 years younger. So again, and both guys don't have a contract for next year. So if the 4 of us were running the Pittsburgh Steelers, I agree with what Lewis said, unless it was discernibly different where Russell Wilson was better, we want Justin Fields to win the job, and we want to extend him so we're not in the same situation next year. So to me, he's younger, he's more athletic, he has more upside. Look, he doesn't have the stature or the accomplishments that Russell Wilson has, but because of his age and, again, the upside, I would go with Justin Fields.
Okay, but so you kind of had an interesting trade proposal in this morning's meeting.
So, RC, unfortunately for Minnesota, history is repeating itself. We go back to 2016. Very unfortunate injury. Teddy Bridgewater had a catastrophic injury at practice. Sam Bradford gets traded from the Eagles to the Vikings. So to me, I think a win-win here is to trade Russell Wilson to Minnesota. I think he's a better quarterback than Sam Darnold. They certainly can battle it out. And then Ryan Tannehill's still a free agent, guys. And you go back to the 2 years that Ryan Tannehill was with Arthur Smith at Tennessee. They had an unbelievable 2-year run. 18-8. They average 30 points per game. Let him come in and at least initially back up Justin Fields. But now you have Justin Fields, who we already said is young. You have Ryan Tannehill, who knows the system and has done a great job with Arthur Smith in the past. And maybe you pick up an extra third or fourth round pick.
Yeah, I mean, that connection, that parallel between Ryan Tannehill and Justin Fields is one, I pointed out a couple different times that, look, he had the best seasons of his career with Arthur. And obviously, Justin Fields is a much better athlete than what Ryan is. And that's not to take anything away from Ryan Tannehill, because he's a fantastic athlete. But I think, to me, that's what Arthur sees. Could I have the same effect on Justin Fields that I had on Ryan? Could I actually take this offense and kind of like boost it and supercharge it a little bit in terms of what I did with Ryan Tannehill and get even more production? See, that just makes sense to me. It just really does. I'm not saying this. Look, the trade makes sense as you proposed it this morning. I hadn't even thought about it in that way. And I don't think Russ would be a detriment to the quarterback room if you kept him there, right? I think he would accept that. But that does make sense because of all the common threads.
I get it. But, Louis, you just said Ryan Tannehill had his best seasons under Arthur Smith, right? His best season. But he's available. And the quarterbacks that they signed this offseason were Russell Wilson, and they traded for Justin Fields. So Ryan Tannehill was there for the taking. A lot of us thought, well, it would make easy sense. Arthur Smith is now in Pittsburgh. Wrote Ryan Tannehill, just get him. After last year, we saw so many starting quarterbacks go down with injury. I don't think the only reason you get rid of a quarterback, especially a veteran in that locker room who doesn't end up winning the starting job, is if he's just like attitude-wise in that QB room, it's a disruption. I don't see Russell being that. So why would I understand the production may not be the same as Justin Fields in the upside, but why would I then get rid of Russell and I'm left with Kyle Allen and
and I mean,
I agree.
Yeah, and also, too, a large part of this entire thing was to have a better quarterback room than you had last year. And having Russell Wilson inside that quarterback room, I do believe makes it a better quarterback room. The only piece I believe Ryan Tannehill adds to Justin Fields or Arthur Smith if he can be some kind of conduit between the two of them. Here is how you run the offense. Here is the way Arthur's going to see things in our third down packages versus this team, versus this defense. This is where Arthur would want you to make your first read. But outside of that, I don't necessarily know if Ryan Tannehill at this moment makes this quarterback room better, Mike T.
Yeah, here's the only thing I would add is, first of all, I agree with what Kmart said. Last year, 66 different quarterbacks started a game, so depth at quarterback is paramount. But once you get to the regular season, the backup doesn't get a lot of reps. So I think one of the other things Ryan Tannehill gives you is by knowing the system, he doesn't need a lot of reps to get ready. And look, somebody, like if the four of us were sitting here in December, someone is going to be this year's Joe Flacco, right? Someone's going to come out of nowhere and help a team materially. And maybe it's Tannehill in Pittsburgh, we'll see. But again, if I'm Minnesota guys, like the verb I'm using, I'm scouring. Like I just lost J.J. McCarthy, who looked great. So,
well, why won't they go get Tannehill if Tannehill's so great, Mike T?
It's a fair question. Maybe, they're looking at all their options, RC, but I would think like between now and the final cuts, once we lost J.J. McCarthy, we got Sam Darnold. Hopefully he resurrects his career, but they should add somebody else.
I do understand your point simply because, you know how important it is, regardless of the position. People who maybe can't do it like they used to, but know it still, those guys are invaluable. And that quarterback, that's see, Justin has never had someone who's been able to really take him aside and say, hey, look, in this offense, I may not be able to do it as good as you anymore, but let me just tell you exactly what will allow you to go ahead and reach your potential. And look, as great as Russ is, this is his first time in this system.
He's never been there.
And so, and again, that's not to say that he would be a detriment to that quarterback.
How much would you have to look at what Russ or Ryan Tannehill could or would do if they had to replace Justin Fields when it comes to that decision?
That's the X factor, right? Like, let's just say that something happened to Justin. Are you comfortable with Ryan Tannehill coming in here and playing now? Or would you be more comfortable with Russell coming in and giving what he can give you at this point in his career? That's a question they'd have to answer.
And I think when you look at Russell Wilson, especially through this preseason, from what I heard about practices, he was so good at orchestrating the offense, making sure he made the right read, maneuvering the defense. But now when you get into game time, not getting the football out of your hand, to not have the self-awareness, that is one of the flaws you have to uncoach yourself or train yourself from. If I'm Mike Tomlin, that makes me a little nervous. But he's played at a high level before. Speaking of that, let's get to the next segment. And this is Louis Riddick's signature segment. It's ridiculous. I'll give Lewis a statement, and he will tell us if it's ridiculous or not. Lewis, if I said that the Cowboys were sabotaging themselves by the way that they're handling the CeeDee Lamb situation, is that ridiculous?
No, that's not ridiculous at all. I mean, we know what he means to this offense. We know, like, look, general managers all the time sit there and they grind their gears about the people who they're going to make long-term investments in and whether or not guys can be trustworthy. Once you pay them, will their production go down? They developed CD. They drafted him. We know he had 1,000 more receiving yards than the next closest wide receiver on their team last year. They're not going anywhere without him, and they're sending a bad message by this not getting done. I don't know what CD is asking for, but I'm telling you this would be, I would be basically like, what is this going to take? Because this sends a tone, and it sets a tone for the Dallas Cowboys, and they are sabotaging their season the longer this goes along.
Let's stay in the NFC East with the number 2 overall pick. Jaden Daniels will have a better rookie year than Caleb Williams. Is that ridiculous?
No, that's not ridiculous at all. And you know Jaden's story well. I mean, from Arizona State to LSU, and the work that this young man has put in to put himself in this position. Would you say, man for man, that Chicago has better weaponry than Washington at this point? Yeah, you would. I'm going to bet on the individual here, and that's no slight whatsoever to Caleb Williams because I think he's going to have a fantastic season. This is going to be fun to watch, but this guy is has a unique skill set to go ahead and meet this challenge in Washington, and by every report that comes out of there, he has done nothing but go ahead and surpass every expectation they've had of him from the day he stepped foot in that building.
Staying in the NFC East with the team that's trying to rebound, the Eagles will miss the playoffs. Is that ridiculous?
Yeah, that's ridiculous. I just don't see how, like, they would have to actively, talk about sabotaging, they'd have to actively sabotage themselves. This football team really is just too good. They have too many people, too many weapons, too many guys who have won at a high level for them to go ahead and mess this up. The only thing that will derail them, I believe, is injury. I don't think any of the other stuff that happens, off the field when it comes to personalities and relationships, I don't think it could get so bad to where this team will miss the playoffs. In that division, don't see it.
ESPN's Bill Barnwell released a list of 5 teams that he thinks will decline in 2024. The Pittsburgh Steelers, New York Giants, Baltimore Ravens, Eagles, and Browns. But let's focus on the Eagles, Mike T. 2 years ago, this team was a series away from winning the Super Bowl, and now they're talking about this team taking the decline from a year that already finished badly. How do you see the Eagles' chances of stacking up against teams like the 49ers, the Lions, and the Packers in the NFC?
RC, I like it a lot. I disagree with Bill Barnwell, and here's why. When you watched Jalen Hurts a year ago, he just seemed like he was not the same player. I think he was playing with injuries, and as Hembo has reminded us, no quarterback has rushed the ball more over the last 3 years than Jalen Hurts, and I think what Saquon Barkley does, guys, not only running the ball, but receiving, he's going to take a lot of that load off of Jalen Hurts, so way more than Kellen Moore, in my opinion. I think Saquon Barkley is a hugely consequential acquisition, and I think the Eagles could stand toe-to-toe with the other powers in the NFC.
Lou, looking at this roster, how do you feel you could even look at this team and not think to yourself they should be better this year than last?
Yeah, I don't think you can, Ryan. I mean, I think the only thing that derails them really in a substantial way to where they can't win their division or be a contender in the NFC is injury. And that's not something that really you can forecast. I don't think you can sit here and go, well, this team is set for a decline because I'm going to predict that a certain number of guys aren't going to be available because of injuries. We don't know how that's going to play out. I just don't see it getting to the point where internally Nick Sirianni is not able to show enough leadership to say, hey, Vic, Kellen, this is how we need to keep it going. This is how we need to maintain the relationship with Jalen Hurts. This is how we need to run this offense. This is how defensively, what I expect from a head coach and perspective, we need to do this thing. And I'm going to let y'all go do your thing now because we understand. Look, once the games start, it's Vic showing the defensive side. Kellen's going to be calling the plays and all. But look, this team is just too talented. It just is. And these guys have won. Just 2 years ago, this is one of the best teams in football now. And it's not like materially they've taken a drop in any really position area of real importance to where you would sit there and go, yeah, I forecast them kind of, falling off the earth or falling off the map here and not challenging for a playoff spot. There's just no way. I'd be, if that happened, yeah, we'd have to have a whole show about that. A whole show.
We will have a whole show about that.
Probably.
I would say it was one terribly timed call that cost them that Super Bowl. Jalen Hurts outplayed Patrick Mahomes. When I think about this team and the fact that there was all this disconnect, friction between the head coach, quarterback, OC, DC, everything was a mess. Things were super tense in the building, and yet they started the season 10-1. Yes, they completely fell off after that. But when I look at Jalen Hurts, I don't care what anybody says, he did not look healthy last year. So when I think about Kellen Moore and the production that Dak had in Dallas with Kellen Moore as his OC, Saquon Barkley, to Mike's point about Saquon Barkley not just being the playmaker he is, but also taking some of the physical workload from Jalen, but also setting up more opportunities for Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown, I'm sorry. I have a hard time seeing the Eagles completely falling off yet again because they started the season 10-1 despite having all those issues.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things, and I remember reading about Bill Walsh always emphasizing this point, is that from a front office perspective, it's critical to allow the head coach to coach this football team on the grass. Mm-hmm. And when it's on the grass, it's his team. Yeah. Let him do it. From the boardroom, don't be trying to reach down onto the field and move things around and shape things in the way you see it. Let Nick Sirianni do his thing. Okay, you hired him, let him do it. If you know what I'm getting at. Just let the coach and the coaching staff work this thing out, and I think this team's going to be fine. Because a lot of times, people can start trying to put their hands into things that don't belong. Yeah. And that's how this kind of team could get screwed up.
RC, this whole idea of Nick Sirianni being on the hot seat, he's 34-17 with 3 playoff appearances, including going to the Super Bowl. Why would that be on the hot seat?